It's not coming on.
Okay, wonderful. It's Andrea. Hi. Leave, are we ready to go?
We're all good.
Okay, hi everyone. So sorry that we might have had some technical difficulties, and I'm seeing names come in now. So glad that we've worked it out and we're here today. Really excited to have you today and speak with everyone about Black women and beauty standards. It's a conversation on subjects of desire. We have a wonderful event. I'm Andrea Gunraj, and I'm with the Canadian Women's Foundation. I'm going to get it started, and then I'm going to hand it off to the Foundation's President and CEO, Paulette Sr., to get us into the panel. But the first things first, the work of the Canadian Women's Foundation and that of the programs we support take place on traditional First Nations, Métis, and Inuit territories. We're of course grateful for the opportunity to meet and work on this land. But we recognize that land acknowledgements are not enough. We need to pursue truth, reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship in an ongoing effort to make right with all our relations. If you don't know about us, the Canadian Women's Foundation is a national leader in the movement for gender equality in Canada. Through funding and research and advocacy and knowledge sharing, we work to achieve systemic change, and we support women, girls, and gender diverse people to move out of violence, out of poverty, and into confidence and leadership. Since 1991, our partners and donors have contributed more than 150 million to move over, or to fund over 2,500, I don't know language for numbers, 2,500 life transforming programs all throughout the country. And just some technical details. I see people coming in now. I'm glad to see that our tech is starting to work out. Please come on in, and we're going to just do some more tech stuff here. If you haven't already, please look at the bottom of your screen. You'll see the interpretation option there, and you can select a language channel. And we have interpreters today, making sure that everyone's words are translated. So please select English or French from the options and ensure a seamless experience for you. And I'm trying to pace myself and speak slowly and make sure that I allow space for interpretation to happen. I've asked our panelists to do the same. You'll see as well, there's captioning available in French and in English. Again, you can visit the chat box for that, and the chat box is at the bottom. If you click that, you'll see it on the side. You'll see some links of where you can go to get captioning available in French and in English. And if you have questions during this event, please type them into the Q&A box during the event. We are monitoring this box, and we'll be able to pose some of your questions at the end of the session, trying to do our best to get as many as possible to our panelists. And if you're having any tech issues, please feel free to pop a note into the chat box, and we'll do our best to assist you. And I see more folks coming in. Thank you very much for coming and joining and sticking through some of those tech issues in the beginning. And finally, at the end of the event, there's going to be a survey available. Please take time to give your feedback if you can. We'd love to hear how we can do better. And if everyone is good to go, we're going to move it over to Paulette Sr. Paulette.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Welcome, everyone. Keep coming in, join us. We're excited about the conversation that we're about to have with the one and only Jennifer Holness, who will now be joining us in this conversation. I've been looking forward to this for a while, Jennifer. It's an exciting opportunity for me as we're kind of in the betwixt and between of Black History Month and International Women's Day and Women's Month. And so this is an opportune time to be talking about Black women, you know, so that's exciting. And I am so thankful that you made this film because it's long overdue to be having this conversation, not just at the dinner tables and restaurants or any settings that Black women gather, but in the open, right? To bring this conversation in the open with allies and folks who've never had a chance to delve into this topic. And so I'm excited about that. Plus, I'm thrilled and honored because you are the Jennifer Holness, the woman who makes films, and it is such an unusual thing among women, you know, overall, but specifically to have a Black woman director. So for all kinds of reasons, Jennifer, I'm excited. Can you tell?
Oh, Paulette, well, thank you. First of all, you're not as excited as I am. So there you are. You know what? Thank you so much for inviting me in this space to have this conversation. It has been a journey. And as you say, as a Black woman making film in the Canadian industry, it's been, you know, there's been so many challenges, but to make this film and to be here in this space with you ladies, to you know, just to talk about some of the issues around Black women in beauty, to bring, as you say, what we women have had conversations at the kitchen table while we're doing hair, but is rarely shared in a meaningful way in the larger community. And so to do that and to have the film out, and it is so exciting, because I actually think that this is where real change gets to happen. We don't understand each other sometimes. There's miscommunication, you know, and we can't be allies if we don't have, if these conversations don't come from the home to the larger world. So yes, I'm here, I'm ready. And
good.
This is exciting time.
Let's get going. Let's get going. So, you know, I'm going to get a little serious because, quite frankly, this is a serious topic. And I think it's so powerful about what's so powerful about this film is the way it situates the representation of Black women and girls in historical as well as political context. I've often heard the phrase that our hair has been politicized, and it's true. And this film actually highlights that as well as overall well-being, and helping people to understand why common stereotypes and tropes are so offensive and yet remain ever present in popular culture. So let's start by me asking you to share with us some of the personal experiences that were at the heart of creating this film.
Okay, yes. So, well, I'm a mother of 3 daughters. And at first I have to start by saying I've been a Black woman my whole life. So what that's meant is that I have engaged into the larger world where I was not and have not been seen, or I've been seen in a certain way that is not how I see myself, right? So I, in my 20s, became more comfortable in my skin. Growing up, I was not. I felt like my skin was too dark. You know, I had like what folks thought was like a nice butt on some level, but in the larger community, it was a bubble butt. Lips were considered unappealing because they were full. And even when I was 17 years old, I had a job at Shoppers Drug Mart, and I loved this job because I was like making money. I was helping my family, and I put braids in my hair one day, went to work, and was told my hair was rude and asked to go home and change it if I wanted to keep my job. So that history or those experiences, you know, I kind of moved beyond them as I sort of became a woman of the world. So now flash forward to mom of 3 daughters, and I'm overhearing a conversation in my kitchen where my daughter's white friends, she went to an all-girls school, and one of 6 Black girls in the school, was being told, "Oh my God, I love your skin. Oh, I wish I had a booty like yours." And this kind of a thing. And they were saying, "Oh, you've glowed up so," and I was like, what is happening here? So then I go to my daughter and I say, wow, you know, after the friends leave, this is so different from when I was growing up. You know, Black women have arrived. And it was like she literally almost burst out into tears. And she expressed to me, you know, that actually she like none of that meant anything. It wasn't true. She didn't feel good about herself. And so then I had conversations with my other 2 daughters, who were a little bit younger and all but teens, and it was the same. And I was shocked, Paulette. I was shocked because I thought in being, you know, I'm a filmmaker. I'm out there making content. I'm traveling the world. I've taken them to places. You know, I thought in this context of being this strong Black female, that they would imbued what I was trying to deliver to them. And then it was when I realized, really realized, that the narratives that are out there about us are so powerful that it didn't matter what I might have been saying, you know, because I wasn't focusing on it. So that's when I knew I had to make this film. That's when I knew that that girls and women were still having these experiences because of the engagement of how media presents Black women. And so, yeah, so that's, so I guess it's some of my personal stories, why I felt like I needed to make this film.
Thanks for sharing that. That's very powerful, and particularly the piece around how penetrable those narratives can be, despite all you do to make them strong and impenetrable, that they still get through that, you know? And along with that, what were some of the key challenges and rewards for you in bringing this film to life?
Oh gosh, so many challenges. Okay, the number one is, look, we're a space of women, and this is a wonderful thing. But one of the challenges is that Black women and white women have been set up historically against each other in some way. I mean, I loved the fact that there's been an acknowledgement that, for example, in the feminist movement, Black women haven't really been supported in the way that they should be. Gloria Steinem, I think a couple of years ago, came out and said this, which was really, really important to me because I've always seen myself as a feminist, you know, but never feeling like I fit into that feminist box in a certain way. So the challenges were, when I started pitching this, surprisingly, a lot of the commissioning editors who were female, they, and I by that I mean Canada, it's predominantly white females, they felt that this was not important. They felt that, hey, we should be concentrating on women and their economic prowess, women and their educational drive. This is what's important in today's time. Why are we talking about beauty? Why is beauty important? And it was a struggle. Some of them really dismissed the film because they didn't understand Black women's stories. They didn't understand the history. They didn't understand that beauty, the thing that, you know, I think so easily is afforded to, you know, the standard of beauty being white, that they didn't understand that being outside of that standard, there was a political power associated that Black women didn't have easy access to on a regular basis. You know, it wasn't natural. It was like you had to fit a certain type. You have to look like Beyonce, for example, to wield that power of beauty. That I think that it, you know, as the standard of beauty, to be honest, white women in some ways felt like we're beyond. So that was a challenge for me. And because you know, it was just like, oh yeah, that's interesting.
Right.
Right. And but then Jane Jankovic at TVO, I found an ally with her, and Linda Fong, for example, in particular, who was the person who actually commissioned me in the very beginning, and then Jane came on board and was really supportive. So that was one of the challenges. The other challenge I felt was that these narratives, these destructive, dangerous narratives, they're so ingrained in society, in media, in how Black women are presented and seen, that, you know, people don't recognize the depth of how it impacts, right? And so even trying to make the film, working with my editor, for example, and even a really supportive TV executive, there was always a thing I had to do where I had to push back and say, no, we got to push the lens here. And I'll give you an example. If you watch the film arcs where we end up talking about appropriation for the most part at the end. And I felt like that was where I wanted to lead the story. But a lot of notes came in to put that off the top. That should be how we start the film. And the reason was, the feeling was that that was the thing that was going to be more interesting. And I had to point out, actually, appropriation is about white women appropriating Black physicality. So you're essentially saying my film has to start off centering the white narrative of beauty. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so of course, I started the film off with this beautiful young Black woman saying, you know, I am Black, I'm beautiful. And then going into Malcolm X saying, you know, what the history is, and then flowing from that. And I did the film the way I wanted. And allyship, by the way, was actually having my executive ultimately supporting me on that. But I was always having to fight for that because it wasn't a natural thing for the folks to, you know, to get that. So that was some of the challenges, you know, and I could go on, but.
Well, yeah, and thank you for fighting, you know, thank you for fighting that fight, because I'm thinking of a number of things. We need 2 hours for this conversation and we don't have that. But, you know, it's also important, you know, and as we try to give people a window into this, you know, if you will. So I want to now talk about, you talk about the young Black woman at the beginning of the film, and we know that, you know, there are a number of conversations that you feature among young Black women and how beauty standards and colorism have impacted their self-esteem. I could talk about that for days, and as well as their mental health. And we, you know, we haven't really paid attention to that in a real way. So briefly, if you can, what struck you most about what they had to say?
Oh, the universality of their experiences. You know, one of the young women said, you know, I'm Black, but I'm a little bit lighter color, and darker complexion has never been valued. She said no one puts on their username like, you know, dark skin beauty, but there's all kinds of girls saying light skin princess and this kind of a thing. And if you're not that light skin princess, it is wow, because colorism in many ways impacts within community. You know, as much as outside of community, we do it to ourselves. So that is the thing that really struck me about colorism, that the fact that we do it to ourselves. It's media supports it, but we do it to ourselves.
So true, so true. So let's build on that a little bit now. You know, so one of the topics that really stood out was, you know, this all has to do with beauty standards, and we talk about misogynoir. I'm going to ask about that next, but the film features that extraordinarily well. So let me just go to that right now. How do you think racist beauty standards and stereotypes carry over into what we call misogynoir?
Yes.
And gender-based violence, the extreme of that. Maybe you can expand on the connections between those two things.
Okay, so look, here's the thing, misogynoir, there is, when I started making this film, I went onto sites where, for example, Black men would talk about Black women, and there was this incredible negative conversation that was being had around. It actually disturbed me. I didn't even know that existed. I mean, I've been married for 25 years. I'm not dating nobody. I don't know what's going on. And so these negative narratives about who Black women are, they're loud, they're mean, like this kind of stuff, and how it plays out. And how it plays out is, I believe that part of the reason I wanted to make this film is because I believe that there's a power behind beauty. And if you are outside the standards of beauty, I believe that means less power, and it manifests itself in certain way. One of the ways that it manifests itself is a lack of protection and a lack of care. So Black women, for the most part, there's a much higher sexual violence against Black women, which I did not know, based on the statistics, that Black women, for example, sex trafficking, 40% of Black women are of the sex trafficking victims in America are Black women, and 25%, for example, are white women. So what that tells me, though, is that because most of the narrative is around sex trafficking, is never around Black women, it tells me that Black women are not being protected. Black women are not being cared for, that the narrative that are spun around Black women help to create an environment where no one is questioning the damage and the violence that are being put upon Black women. And
Mhm.
I believe that that is a part of power and beauty combined, right? We don't need to worry about that Black woman. She doesn't feel pain. We don't need to worry about that Black woman. You know, no one's gonna snatch her up. Yet, in fact, that's what's happening, right? There have been serial killers, and you know, there was a story that came out like over 100 Black women, and no one even in California, and no one even knew that a serial killer was in existence until like 3 years ago. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that that happens around Black women, and the narrative that even within our community, with I think with Black men, for example, that perpetuates this kind of
Mhm.
negativity. So for me, it's almost one of the reasons why I wanted to have, I really felt very strongly that I should have Rachel Dolezal in the film, because Rachel was able to express, for example, how she was married to a Black man, and how that Black man, for example, wanted her to be as white as possible, for her to reject any, I mean, she's obviously a white lady, but
Mhm.
she really felt at home in Black community and loves Black femaleness, right? I mean, that's what I got from my conversation with her.
But for him, it was something to be ashamed about.
Something to be ashamed of, exactly.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so misogynoir is really, really painful, because in many, many ways, it's how um, within community we are seen and dealt with, you know?
Yeah. You know what, Jennifer, it almost brings me to tears, and I'm sure it has brought me to tears when I think about that and the impact of it. And I don't have a daughter, but I have a ton of extraordinary nieces that I love, and uh, the impact is definitely there, you know. And when you talk about the example of the serial killer and how that was ignored, that is just so emblematic, because what we are ignored, we are trivialized, we are dehumanized,
Completely.
you know, and unless unless we have films like this, we actually that pinpoints the experiences of Black women in the open. We have to keep repeating, like your daughter, right? We have to look at the generational impact of that, right? And so I'm looking forward to the benefit that will come from this film, and the progress that you think Black women and girls can make in terms of where we are now, and the progress that you have seen since your girlhood, childhood, young womanhood to now.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to add one other thing, because around that last question, because I just think it's so important. I made this film to open up conversations and for allyship. I opened I made this film because I wanted Black women and girls to understand that the things that they were feeling were not imagined, because that's the other part of it. Because no one really, because it was sort of amongst us, it's like no one really saw it, you know, like that, for example, that angry Black woman stereotype, just by virtue of disagreeing with someone, by having a different opinion, it is something that gets put onto Black women pretty quickly,
Yep.
literally. And you don't, and it disarms you, because even if you stand up for yourself, you feel shaken, because you feel like something is wrong with you. Like, why am I having this experience, you know? And this is someone who I respect even, and they're seeing me in this way. And so it's meant to really shrink you. But just flipping to the misogynoir, when I was in Colorado, I screened the film, and this really lovely white lady came up to me, and she said to me, I date Black and Hispanic men primarily, and almost all of the Black men that I dated, they had a lot of terrible things to say about Black women. She goes, I watched your film, and now I understand the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And that was so powerful to me, because I knew that here because of this film, there was an ally. There was an understanding about us that it's because the media does not take time to create stories around Black women where we get our full agency, where we understand, and think about this, ladies, almost every film that has been made up until maybe about 5 years ago had a white female at the center who was both the object and both the thing that was to be protected, to be, father trying to find his daughter who's been, captured in Europe, beautiful young girl who is the object of love and attention, Miss Congeniality, the center, who she's a tomboy, but she's beautiful. Almost every single female, every single movie that had been made centers a white female as the thing to protect and to care for. And Black women, for the most part, if they become the best friend, which is what like the best you could get, and you'd be seen, there was no home life, and you only exist to support, in reference and to support. So how could, and if we get our media, if we get an understanding from the world, from media, what do we understand about Black women then, right?
Yeah, we're a sidekick.
Exactly. At best, right?
Yeah.
So, so this is why this film, I think in many ways, it's important, because now we understand that what these narratives are, and actually maybe you'll take a moment and get to know a sister and get to know more about what's going on, and so anyways, I apologize.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you are no sidekick, my sister. You are nobody's sidekick. So I am so grateful to you again for making this film that will spur conversations. And I'm looking forward to, conversation that will make a difference, right? That will raise the conversations in all spaces, and humanize us in a way that is that's helpful for us and for generations to come. And so being the fabulous, incredibly skilled, insightful, yada, yada, yada woman that you are, I just love you, you know that. What do you have, maybe just a snippet about something you're working on for the future that we could look forward to?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for asking that question. So right now, I am dropping in the world a new documentary series on Black Canadian history. It's called BLK, an Origin Story. So here's the thing, ladies. Okay, Black Canadians have been integral in the creation of Canada. We have been here since the 16 and 1700s, but we are not taught anything about this history. And it is powerful history, and it's important history. And myself and my partner, Sutherland, we're so privileged to be given the opportunity to make this groundbreaking series. And here's the thing. It's a history doc series, but it was so good. Global said, we want it too. So Global and History, they're the sister channels. And so every Friday, for the next 4 weeks, including tomorrow, you can watch BLK, an Origin Story on Global at 9 o'clock. Okay, so it's every Friday. Please tune in. We need support, because when you make these films and these series, and it's such important work. But when you make it and people don't tune in, they'll be like, oh, we can't support this thing. So we need support. Please share about BLK, an Origin Story. It is so important to our nation to have this history be known. And you can also watch it on History, by the way, on Saturday nights.
Well, good to know.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you again. I'm going to shift from you, Jennifer, into a panel conversation with two incredible women. And so I'm going to invite Sydney Piggot and Wendy Komiotos to join us. I believe they are here. And we're now going to talk about this in a different context, if you will, and have these women just sort of expound on a few things about the film. So thank you both so much for coming, Sydney and Wendy. We just are going to get into a couple of things about this film. I know there are probably many audience questions, so we'll get to them very soon, so hold them for a moment. But now I'm going to just chat with Wendy, who is the Executive Director of METRAC, which is action on that supports action on violence. And gonna ask Sydney, who is the Director of Community Engagement at Elevate, to also, in a sentence, not two, because we don't have a lot of time, just tell us about yourself. So can I start with you, Sydney?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here. And Jennifer, that was incredible. This film was incredible. My name is Sydney, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement at Elevate. Really, I work with underrepresented communities, helping to bring greater opportunities, in particular to racialized folks, queer communities, women, girls, and femmes, to really bring us to the center of conversations around economic empowerment. I've done work in the gender equity space for a long time, so really excited to be part of this conversation.
Thank you. And Wendy, I haven't seen you forever, but now I am. Good to see you. And I believe you're muted, so if you could unmute yourself, that would be great. You are good.
Much time. Okay, so hi everyone, and thank you so much for that, Jennifer. I'm so proud of you, and I'm so proud of the work that you're doing. And I'm sure that all the young women, Black women who will get to watch your film, especially through METRAC's program, will also feel wonderful, but also see themselves and be able to know that, yes, we're on this in our generations to support younger generations. So just about me, Executive Director of METRAC, we've been around for almost 40 years. It's quite an old agency in terms of surviving to address the issue of gender-based violence, which is, of course, just ongoing and unrelenting. And yeah, we have various programs. There's a community justice program. There's a youth program, which, thank God, has been funded for 15 years, I would say, by the Canadian Women's Foundation. And it has helped the program to survive today, where not only are young people learning about healthy, equal relationships, but now with COVID, they're learning about how to cope with isolation and emerging mental health issues. That's a big issue for young people. So yeah, I'm just like thrilled about this work, and I'm honored to be here.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Sydney. Okay, so I don't have to talk about how this film resonated with me on so many different levels. But one of the interviewers in the film talks about picking her battles when it comes to dealing with discrimination, racism, cultural appropriation, and so forth. Can you relate how do you yourself navigate in your own lives? And can we start with you, Wendy?
Sure, picking my battles. Well, I think for me, it's very important to surround myself with conscious women, Black women, women of color, and good allies, white allies. That is really important in order for me to get my strength day by day, because racism, as the young women and a lot of the participants on the film set, they're so inundated, and it's historical, it's been around, and every time you're dealing with one piece, something else pops up. And the words of one of the actors, or possibly not actor, maybe real women who were talking on the film, really resonate with me. You have to choose how you're going to actually go through the world in order to stay alive. And, and sometimes it may mean, in her case, she said, you just choose which issue you're going to deal with. And she identified the Black Lives Matter. For me, I've chosen to deal with the issue of violence against women, gender-based violence, in particular, expanding to more recently to integrate trans, non-binary, and two-spirit communities. And I've also chosen to do that work with like-minded primarily Black and racialized women and white allies. And it has created a workplace that is very nurturing, validating, but also the collective synergy of going out there and tackling a deeply systemic issue, not only around the gender-based violence piece as the primary piece, but the interconnecting issues of racism, of homophobia, and all those different pieces. I hope that it helps, but that
Oh,
has been
snaps to that, snaps to that, Wendy. That was really good. And someone just commented to talk about the how do you put the cumulative impact of that. And it's so true. So over to you, Sydney. Thoughts from you.
Absolutely. I think exactly what Wendy said, and kind of from your conversation before, surrounding yourself by people who will support you during so many different micro and macro aggressions that you'll experience all the time is really important. I think especially for the folks who are here who are non-Black in the audience or thinking of using this as a tool for education, having people who will stand up on your behalf, bystander intervention, real allyship, and being an accomplice in this work is super important, because it's exhausting. And that's what came out of the film. It's so tiring to stand up every single time you hear something offensive, every single time there's a real threat to yourself and your livelihood. So I really appreciate all the people who have been able to step in for me when I'm too tired to do it, or being that person for someone else. And I think what really stood out to me in the film, and kind of similar to what you're saying around picking your battles, is, you know, we're on Zoom screens a lot these days, and I notice I'm looking at myself a lot more, and I'm thinking, you know, how many times would I never wear my hair like this to work or to a job interview? Or how many times did I think to myself, I need to change the way that I look to be more palatable to kind of this white supremacist institutions that we're working in? And so being able to say, you know, today I'm not going to do that, or today I'm going to come as my true self, it happens slowly but surely. And I think that's kind of where I've understood, you know, where can I actually bring my true self to this space, but where do I also have to speak to that survival piece and say, how will this impact me getting a job or being able to survive and do this work? So I couldn't get over how much I related to those messages, and it felt so emotional and so reassuring to see that in the film.
Yeah, I'm loving the plaits, by the way. You're wearing them. That's letting the hair go free. Love it.
Exactly.
Yeah, so important. And the whole sort of cultural appropriation was quite vivid in the film, you know, from the tops of our heads to the bottom of our feet, like everything, you know, was up for grabs and was being grabbed and appropriated. So really, really important. The film actually highlights positive initiatives around representation of us, of Black women and girls, whether it's Miss Black USA or, you know, hashtag Black Girl Magic. Are there any role models or initiatives that you look to for inspiration? And I'm thinking about this question a couple ways, Wendy. You know, you and I, if you don't mind me grouping you,
Sure.
we're of a certain age.
Yes.
And you know, Sydney is, you know, closer to the kind of mid or the other end of the spectrum for us. But I'm really interested, based on who we are today, any role models or initiatives that we look to then and now for inspiration.
Yes.
Sydney, well, go ahead, Wendy, you started, go ahead.
Okay, sure, quickly. You know, I must say that my grandmother, when I was reflecting on this question, my grandmother, of course, you know, grew up in a very difficult time, and being from Barbados, of course, was able to access the typical work that would be available in a tourist environment. So, of course, she worked as a maid, but was real in a hotel, but really invested a lot of time and energy in the next generation. And I know I benefited a lot from her wisdom. I know I benefited a lot from the importance of you know, she emphasized education and being the best and being proud of yourself. And every day I could say, honestly, that there are many sayings, words of wisdom that resonate with me as I go through my day and as I come up against challenges. And often I share that with my colleagues at work. And so I bring my grandmother to work, whether it's by Zoom or in the office space prior to Zoom, pre-COVID. But that really, like, her voice is, and her spirit lives on in my life. And I'm thankful for that.
I'm thankful for that too, Wendy. Thank you. Sydney.
Amazing. And I have the privilege of having so many mentors in my life. Paulette, you know, you're one of them. I saw Rain in the chat there, one of them as well. And really similar in my family, just incredible people who have been role models for me, have empowered me and really like helped me up in those really challenging times. But I think what might be helpful is a resource that I found really great. And yes, I am a young woman, but this is an even younger woman. You may have seen the Instagram account. It's called The Darkest Hue. If you haven't seen it, then check out at darkest.hue on Instagram. And so
I will check it out.
Please do, and I can send it afterwards so it can be shared. But the conversation around colorism was really important in this film. And I'm a mixed race person, a fair-skinned Black person, and that really, really resonated with me around kind of how this white privilege combines with this internalized racism to make this just awful situation that's really challenging to navigate. And I think what The Darkest Hue has shown me, it's an Instagram account that talks about colorism and speaks about dark-skinned women, girls, and femmes and their experiences. So educational around grounding the experience of dark-skinned Black women and, you know, teaching other folks in different communities about what that experience is like. And I think it's really helped me to unpack the internalized racism that I've carried around, for me to take accountability for the harm that I've caused in my own community. And I really recommend that anybody look at this account and learn. This is a young woman. Please support her financially as well, because she's a student. But I've learned so much from that around colorism, pretty privilege, around this desirability capitalism that is so important to talk about. And I love to be able to be mentored by people who are younger than me. So it was really, really an incredible resource that stood out to me recently.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm looking forward to, I'm not a regular Instagram person, but I'm gonna go on just to look at that for sure. And thanks for sharing about your own journey on this sort of trajectory that we're on of learning and unlearning. It's so important. So thank you for that. I'm gonna wrap up our conversation and I'm gonna ask you to keep your comments very brief because this is a big question, but I would like for you to be as concise as possible. And because this is an issue that is systemic, you know, so it's not frivolous in any way, even though sometimes you can see beauty as something that is frivolous. The film really highlights the importance of this issue to our daily lives, you know, and so how do you think we can continue to uproot and challenge stereotypes among future generations? Because it's the future generations that we're concerned about, and you're pointing to the importance of not just mentoring up, but mentoring across, like supporting folks across that age spectrum. So I'm going to start with you, Sydney. How do you think we can actually uproot and challenge stereotypes for future generations?
Well, this film is a great start because I think they're really grounded in the conversation around rejecting the idea that Blackness is an aesthetic. It kind of comes from this idea that there's an entitlement to Black women, and I really hate that. That's what cultural appropriation is grounded in, right? This entitlement. That's what touching, you know, Black women's hair comes from. This entitlement to Black beauty, and it's not okay. So really understanding how that is something that perpetuates violence in so many ways against Black women and femmes is super important. And I think having those conversations with younger generations and with the kind of accomplices and allies that we're working with is really important. I think what really stood out to me from this film in terms of breaking down those stereotypes is really understanding where this is rooted in, right? Rooted in this idea that there's a type of entitlement ownership over Black features or Black beauty. And it's not like that, right? This film really showed Blackness is not a monolith. It's not one thing. we're very diverse. We have rich cultures and traditions. And it's really important for us to understand that these things are important for our identities. And so they're not to be stolen and taken, like so many things have been stolen and taken from Black people and Black women. So understanding the roots of that is so important. And I think once we think about that, instead of just like, you know, that white person can't have dreadlocks, or that white woman can't get, you know, butt injections, you know, it's bigger than that, you know, that's just the symptom. We need to really think about the root of where this is coming from.
Okay, yes. Wendy, what can you add? You're muted.
It's really to really find opportunities within your peer group of your own people to validate and share with each other your strengths and sort of come into your own sense of self and your own strengths. I think that when you live in a society where you're constantly being judged against a standard that is so unrealistic, and when there's really often no intention to see the wonderful stuff that you're doing or you're achieving, it's important that you surround yourself with people who are honest, will challenge you, but also give you that really heartfelt conversation about or check around who you are and how you're appearing to be in a way that, you know, you feel you can trust. And that was one of the messages that also came out in the film that I love. The fact that, you know, there were a group of young women talking about their experiences of being negated and, you know, invalidated and being made invisible or treated as other, or just plain old, you know, being treated as not worthy of love. And so, but yet there was one moment where one of the young women turned to a darker skinned young woman, and it might have, I'm not sure if it was her sister or not, but the reality is that she did say very beautifully and touching, you know, you are beautiful. And these are all the different points I see that are beautiful in you. And it was just very touching. And I believe that we need to do that more with each other, because, you know, you have to be able to dilute or even just decimate those negative day-to-day messages that you're bombarded with. That's it.
Well, that one just touched my heart. And thank you for sharing that. And I see Jennifer said those are her two daughters. So that's why it's so touching and beautiful. I know. Thank you for bringing
so
that.
Nice. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow, it wasn't planned.
Well, we're ending there. We're ending there with our panel conversation. Thank you so much. I appreciate you both. And I appreciate Jennifer for making this film. And I'm going to hand this over now to Andrea Gunraj, who's going to take some curated questions from the audience to the panelists.
That was so beautiful. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to you, Paulette. And we just have a couple of additional questions for you that I think match very much what you folks have been saying. I have a question here. What are the kinds of challenges to misogynoir that you would like to see more of today, just in general, at large? Let's start with you, Cindy, and we'll go to Wendy.
Absolutely. And I think I'm going to come back to Darkest too, because I just have been learning so much from her recently. But really interesting in her conversation, and a conversation that Jennifer talked about in the film, is how colorism and misogynoir are interrelated, right? These statistics are helpful to understand the impact between Black women as opposed to white women or other racialized folks. But even within our community, there is an inequitable kind of support for the folks who are experiencing this the most. So I think what I would love to see, you know, the fact that we even have a term for this now compared to, you know, 20 years ago is incredible. But let's also think about how our positionality impacts our experiences of violence as well. And skin tone is one of those things, but class is another one of those things. Talking about trans women, queer women, it's another conversation as well. So I think when it comes to Misogynoir, I'd love to see more spaces where we're thinking about this more intersectionally, where we're thinking about this more from the different experiences that Black women have. And it kind of goes back to what I said before is, you know, the Black community is incredibly diverse, and to think of us as just one community that experiences one issue, it really just is not serving anyone. So I think that's what I would love to see in those spaces.
Wonderful, thank you. Wendy?
Sure. I think for me, I really like the Misogynoir piece. I think we need to be able to mobilize, and I don't know who the we will be, but there's a need to mobilize Black men to really understand their role in creating and building a more positive experience in the world. And it doesn't have to be a sexual relationship here. I'm talking about the brother and sister, and also including folks in our communities that identify as trans and non-binary, and really engaging about how we're going to tackle the issue of the negation, the systemic violence that occurs in our society, and in many ways that we feed into, especially, you know, Misogynoir feeds into that dynamic in a way that is very harmful, especially given that historically, and I believe, again, that was pointed out in the film, that we're often there, you know, for the community and for men in our community. So I feel like that's a piece that needs to be unpacked and addressed in a meaningful and systemic way. That internalization of our own oppression and our women's oppression.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And we just have one closing question. If you had to give one piece, essential reading, writing, podcast, watching, beyond this film itself, what would you recommend so that we can further our learnings today? Wendy?
I would say The Bluest Eye. The Bluest Eye, because it goes to the heart of the damage and just self-hate, the depth of self-hate, that racism and the bombardment of negativity towards Black women, and the absolute harm it can done, you know, mental health wise, even in terms of self-harming, and so much that that main character had to escape from reality to a different place in order to feel safe and to feel validated. So yeah, that's The Bluest Eye. It's an old one, it's a classic, and Maya Angelou's passed, but that's the book for me.
Sydney?
Absolutely. I think recently Bell Hooks passed away, and I know for a lot of Black feminists and feminists in general, that was just incredibly hard to lose somebody who has influenced so much of our thinking around this work. And so I think, like most people, I was revisiting a lot of her work recently, and I finished rereading Talking Back, Thinking Feminist, Thinking Black, and I think that is an incredible thing to read. And everyone should read it. Anyone who calls himself a feminist should read it as well. I think anything by Bell Hooks is incredible, but really thinking about taking that power back and not feeling like somebody who needs to fight to be seen or fight to be served in whatever way that we tend to see a lot, especially in Canada, where it's, you know, these white dominated spaces. Yeah, it just felt so empowering. So I really, really recommend it.
Thank you so much. I would expect nothing less than recommendations of the ones that you've mentioned here. We had Bell Hooks and we had Toni Morrison as well spoken to us.
Yeah.
You know, classics So that really helps us a lot. Thank you. Thank you for being here, sharing your experiences. I want to thank Jennifer Holness as well, the mighty, mighty filmmaker, Jennifer Holness. And please support not only Subjects of Desire, but BLK as well too. We know that that's going on right now. Very worthy for us to pay attention to and make sure we get more of this content, especially in the Canadian context. Thank you to you, Paulette, for leading us in this.
Yes.
And yes, shameless plug for Paulette. She did
Yes,
a podcast.
Paulette.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And
She
you,
did a
Andrea.
podcast on this issue and on Misogynoir and connecting it with gender-based violence. Do listen to this podcast. It's called All Right Now What? It's from the Canadian Women's Foundation. And I think that you'll really get a little bit more of this content. I mean, we just scratched the surface. So we're going to go on to a second part. My colleague Anurada Dugal is going to talk through a community facilitation toolkits that we put out that matches and pairs with this film. And she's going to give you all the details about this. But like my greatest and deepest thank you to all of you for participating today. And of course, if you have any more questions, any more comments, you put them in the chat, you put them in the Q&A, and Anu, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Paulette. Thank you, Wendy and Sydney. That was amazing. I really, really appreciated listening to your fantastic insights and the comments on this film that were a film that I've now watched, I think, 2 times back to front, and I keep on dipping in and watching clips from time to time. Mostly actually most recently so that we could help develop this discussion guide for you to help anyone who's thinking of hosting a community screening. So if you're interested in hosting a community screening, I have a few things to share with you right now that will help just sort of set up your thinking about how you might do this. I'm just going to share my screen to explain to you a couple of things about the about how to find out about, sorry, my screen's flickering. There we go. How to find out about some of the, how to have these conversations. So if you want to book a screening, you will receive a PDF form from Canadian Women's Foundation first off, but you can also go to Subjects of Desire to their website, and you can book screenings actually for any kind of school, community or corporate event, or you can email Subjects of Desire. And then if you are particularly interested in doing a conversation that I think is perhaps connected to what we just discussed, misogynoir, gender-based violence, other forms of anti-Black racism that are particularly directed to Black women and girls, femmes, and non-binary people, then we are hoping to show you a few ways that you can do that this afternoon. You can get hold of a community screening license that will be funded by Canadian Women's Foundation so that you can hold a screening in your community, in your school or otherwise, and this license will be good for a year. So you can find a way to do that. And online, you can see in that same space that I just showed you, the host screening page, there is a community facilitation kit, which is more school-based. There's the online discussion clip library, and there's the virtual screening room. So you will find those three links on the Subjects of Desire website, where you can find out how to host your own screening. So this will all be sent out to you by email. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute while I change my screen. And so one of the things that you can do when you host that particular screening is, obviously you want to have a discussion afterwards. And I know that Paulette and Jennifer, Wendy, Sydney, and Andrea just gave you a great example of how you might hold that discussion and who you might invite, as well as the kinds of questions you could ask. But just so that you have something in addition to this recording on hand to help you have your thoughtful conversations, we've also prepared a short guide for you. that will just walk you through a few ideas. Now, this is really just to save you time. We're assuming that you know how to hold a conversation. We know that you have relationships with your groups already. We know that you have ground rules and you know how to manage group dynamics and how to facilitate a conversation. So with that being our assumption, we have developed a guide to just help you perhaps enter a conversation that you haven't before with these groups, based on the conversations within the movie, the documentary, and that these are important conversations to have around misogynoir, around how Black women navigate the world, how they're forced to navigate the world because of white supremacy, and how to have those conversations in mixed groups, in white groups, in groups of color, so that you learn more about being an ally and perhaps less about asking Black women to explain themselves again and again, which we're very grateful that Wendy, Sydney, Paulette, and Jennifer took that upon themselves today, but that is not their role forever and ever, amen. So I just want to make sure that we're very clear that any people that are invited into your group, it is now our responsibility as people of color, as white people, as mixed race, as I am, to make sure that you have taken on this analysis and you can carry it forward further. And that's really why I'm presenting this to you this afternoon. So I will share my screen again with you. If there are any questions, of course, the Q&A is still open, and I will continue to monitor it just in case you throw things in. And if anybody wants to jump in just before I share my screen with the community discussion guide, I'm just going to pause there in case there's anything that I've missed or a comment that people wanted to add before I go any further. Okay, super. All right, so I'm going to share my screen again. And this time, this is to let you have a look at the discussion guide so that you can have a look at it before, before it's actually online. And you can consider some of the ways that you might be able to use it as you think about also booking your community screening. So at the beginning, we've tried to provide you with some grounding statements. So obviously we've talked about misogynoir as being very much central to both the racialized and gendered violence that Black women in particular experience, and how this relates to both myths of beauty and the ways in which we consider harms that Black women experience. And I think Jennifer in particular, we're going to pick up some of the themes that Jennifer raised about how Black women are often perceived as being either not worthy of protection, or not needing protection, not as virtuous, or also, all because of respectability politics, also not experiencing harm in the same way as white women. And that is very much why we center this conversation on misogynoir. We also want to make sure that you understand your groupings before you get into these groups. So you might want to hold discussions for Black only groups or women only groups. You might want to have it only with women of color. Or you might say, okay, my community is very varied and diverse. I want everybody there, but then you could break it up into smaller groups once everyone gets there. This is very important to make spaces for safer and richer conversations, and a way that you can also challenge each other within your allied groups. So as a South Asian woman, I have perhaps an ability to make comments to other South Asian women about anti-Black racism that are received differently because I'm perceived, whether I am or not, I'm perceived as being inside that group. And so those are things that you just want to consider as you're building your groups and you're thinking about how you might want to break down into smaller groups. The other thing to note is that Blackness and white are not opposite. White is really about being white supremacist, and white supremacist doesn't mean because you're white, you're automatically a racist. That is not what that term means. White supremacist means that the ways that we've built a settler colonial in the case of Canada, but a white country that has been built on the assumption that white is essentially the right way to be, and anything outside of that is other or different. And therefore, we have to start, and again, Jennifer explained this, how she, how does she begin her film? Does she begin the film by centering Blackness, or does she begin the film with a question to what is this centering of whiteness that constantly happens in the communities, society, in the nations, in the countries that we find ourselves in? So that is a very important point to start off as you're beginning your conversations too. And therefore, Blackness is not the opposite. Blackness is often, within white supremacy, is invisibilized. It is made to be inhuman. It is not the opposite of white. It simply does not exist in whiteness. And that's another very important point about why the harms and the pains of identity are experienced in the way that they are. So this is why it's very important not to rush to this idea of diversity or some kind of cultural mixing of identities as a way to explain away what is anti-Black racism or white supremacy. We first have to live. It's like what we say about truth and reconciliation when we're talking about Indigenous communities. You have to live with the truth first. It's not about rushing to solutions. And that's, I think, a really important part too, that we have to train ourselves to do within our community settings and in the way that we reflect on the kinds of racism, the harms that anti-Black racism has done and the harms to Black women. So that's, I think, another thing that we have to stop and consider. And also, let's not rush to excuse Canada. Canada is a safe country, it's a great country. Those things all exist alongside anti-Black racism exists in Canada, alongside policing disproportionately affects and harms Black bodies more than any other bodies. The reality is systemic racism functions in such a way that we don't see those harms. It's made invisible from our education system, from the ways we report our justice statistics, from the ways we consider how even powerful women, Black women or powerful Black men are perceived and celebrated or not celebrated in many cases. All the ways that maybe as a white person in Canada or as a person of color in Canada, that you do not see anti-Black racism are part and parcel of the racism that has made itself invisible. So it's very important to make sure when you start these conversations, you center the reality that slavery happened in Canada, that Black people have been a part of Canadian society since the very beginning of the arrival of Europeans in Canada too, and that those things go hand in hand. The purpose of much of Canadian history is to try and center English and French colonial histories in the creation of Canada. That is not the case, and we have to try and undo that. And it's as important to undo it in terms of anti-Black racism as it is in terms of anti-Indigenous racism. And very much, I'd say those two invisibilizations have worked together to create the model of what is a settler colonial Canada. And that's what we're trying to decolonize. That's what we're trying to undo in the ways that that's also connected to many, many other forms of discrimination and I guess just real lack of understanding of what's happening for multiple communities. Othering, I guess, is another word. So the last thing when you are having that conversation is also to think about what is the context that is happening right now in the community you're in. So first of all, make sure that you're aware of news items, community happenings, school-based incidents, so that you're ready to contextualize those for the group if they come up. So very often you'll start a conversation and somebody will say, ah, yes, but what about X, Y, Z that just happened? And as a facilitator, it might be your tendency to ask somebody who you perceive as being more knowledgeable than you to jump in and help explain that situation to the group at whole. Once again, I'm saying this is not your role to pull somebody into your facilitation conversation. If somebody volunteers, that's a whole different kettle of fish. But the idea is that you as facilitator must be ready to respond to questions as they arise and be aware enough and prepared enough to deal with them in a way that's sensitive and that contextualizes the racism that might be brought up in those conversations. So just once again, your job is to make sure that no single Black or racialized person becomes the focus of any questions, but especially of inappropriate questions. So that's another thing to just prepare yourself for if you're going to have these conversations in a mixed group. And so here are the discussion ideas. I think there may be a couple of questions, I'm not sure. So maybe I'll just, before I get to the we have 4 discussion ideas, which I'll go through quickly. I'm just going to check the Q&A to see if there's anything coming up. Right. Okay, so I'll come back to the forms at the end of this next point. Okay, so the discussion questions. So first of all, the idea of exploring misogynoir. We have given you a link that explains Moya Bailey, who was a gay Black feminist who established the idea of misogynoir. And it is true, as it was explained, that it's typically used to describe the misogyny experienced by Black women from Black men, but anyone can perpetrate misogynoir. And we have to just be open to that and remind ourselves about the fact that it's the intersection of both racism and gendered violence towards Black women. So we have a couple of questions here. So the archetypes were discussed in the documentary, the Mammy, the Jezebel, and the Sapphire stereotypes. And one of the important things is how these archetypes include an unacknowledged and unnamed violence towards Black women as those roles are formulated. So one of the questions we want to ask, or we're encouraging the discussion to revolve around, is why it's so important that we address ignoring violence within archetypes, and how does that continue to harm women and gender diverse people today. And this question is true for the archetypes, but honestly, it's true for any stereotyped image we have for Black women that are attached to these archetypes, which continue to harm women and gender diverse people today. The next question is one that I would say probably is best for a group of Black women or Black and racialized women. The conversation about Black men and dating and Black women and dating is extremely sensitive and potentially harmful if it's done in a mixed group. So I would say this is a group that really has to be sensitive to who you're talking to and how much care and consideration you're giving to each other. And I'll use just the example of there were two talking circles in the documentary. One was a group of one of the participants in Miss Black America was having wine with her girlfriends around the table. And they were talking about dating and who they dated and why they had ended up going out with this person or this person. And they described to each other in that moment what they had never actually realized before, which was an underlying racism in how those relationships had been formulated and the ways that they had judged each other about some of those relationships. So this is very important in the question about why Black men might choose white partners and how that relates to either internalized racism or a form of proximity to whiteness, which is another idea that many racialized people are essentially trying to protect themselves with white partners. It happens again and again and again. And we can't deny that that's one of the ways in a society where we're not the majority, we try to associate ourselves with the majority in a way that will protect us. So that's something that definitely has to be brought up. I think it's important, I mentioned here Eternity Martis's book. They said this would be fun because there are several chapters of her book really explore in another format, in a fictional memoir format, some of the questions that Jennifer's film also brings up. And I just found there was a very interesting kind of collision of ideas here about how we blame women and why we blame women and we don't ask what's going on underneath those judgments that we have towards other women. So that's an exploration that might be interesting. Of course, we've talked today about misogynoir being a part of systemic violence, as well as gender-based violence, but also the effect it has on how women are able to affect their own healing journeys in their own communities. So we've said, and it's been said many, many times, but it has to be repeated, not only do we silence Black women through anti-Black racism, but they're also often not believed, their pains and their harms are minimized. They are refused care in healthcare settings, as well as shelters, as well as community organizations. And they also avoid reaching out to those services because they know that sometimes those services either won't take them seriously or they will be, it will be used as a way to blame or punish that they as women or any other racialized or Black men involved in the situation. So again, this is an opportunity to explore those ideas and not go automatically to some judgments or assumptions about why some of those things happen. Another subject we'd like to invite you to discuss separately is tone policing. So there's a fantastic clip where Julie Black describes her exchange with Jean Becker about Canada Reads, where automatically it's assumed that the way that Julie Black is defending her own idea is an attack on a white woman. And again, this goes back to the stereotypes that we discussed earlier on, or I sort of unpacked a little bit. But we really have to be careful of tone policing. It's a way to silence, it's a way to shut down people's lived experience. It's a way to tell somebody that they're being too emotional or they're not allowed to have the analysis they have because it's coming across wrong, because it's being used with the wrong tone of voice. Whereas what they're actually saying is, I don't agree with you, I don't want to hear it, it's bothering me, you're upsetting my assumptions about who I am, who Canada is, how it exists in my world. So let's just, this is an opportunity to perhaps unpack that a little bit in a group conversation, as well as thinking about ways that if you are comfortable with the idea of code switching, discuss how that happens and discuss perhaps as a person of color, a Black and Indigenous person, how we learn to code switch and how we learn to make our views more palatable, the ways in which we try and fit a white view or a white model of what is considered acceptable discourse, and the ways in which, again, we shut ourselves down, actually, because we're afraid also. We've been told this so often that we stop using that voice, right? That's something that we need to be careful of, particularly working with young people, because young people's voice is actually what we're trying to hear again and again. So we need to be ready that we're not ready to be told that we are shutting it down so that we can start being open to hearing voices, no matter the tone. The tone is part of the message. The resistance is an important part of the message. And I think those are also things that we have to learn over time as we try and take on these conversations. Our third idea that we'd like to offer you as a possibility to discuss is this idea of consuming Blackness, that it's a racialized idea that we can consume the aesthetics of Blackness and somehow own them. This, of course, connects back to, and it was touched on very, very briefly in the conversations today, but it touches on the idea of being able to even connect to Blackness while we think of it as something that we might be doing to celebrate Blackness. I just want to be really aware that if you're not Black, there is an appropriation going on, and that has to be discussed. So this is why we want this to be part of one of your discussions, we hope. And although I didn't add the reference here, I would also, if you are feeling especially brave and you think you've got a group that can take it on, I might even add here conversations about blackface in Canada, because there's a lot to be said about that. I would refer you to Professor Philip Howard at McGill, who has had a lot to say about the use of blackface in modern day Canada, and a research that he's done over the last 10 years about how it's not going away, that we can't pretend it's not happening, we can't pretend it's disappearing, and we certainly can't pretend that it's not being enacted again and again. Every year, every Halloween, there are stories about it. It goes way deeper than even this conversation about aesthetics. So please look at the conversation on aesthetics too, but if you wanted to, I would encourage you to perhaps take it further into looking at the connections to blackface also. And finally, examining media representation. So media representation as in who, this is perhaps a conversation for those who are just starting out. It's an introduction to the idea of what's beauty, where does it get shown, how does it get shown, who most often is represented. It's a way to open a conversation, perhaps as a jumping off point. So I would offer that media representation conversation as a simpler, perhaps for a younger audience or people who haven't had much exposure to some of the ideas we've shared today. And finally, we really want to offer you the chance to say, after you've had a conversation like this, after you've watched a movie like this, there needs to be space to just express some ideas, just openly, with no direction at all. Again, you need to find a way to do it in a safe way amongst people who can hear what is happening from each other. But people need to have a space to ask questions, to express what's upset them, to vent, to share their own experiences outside of this very controlled discussion. So you need to perhaps also as a facilitator think about how you would do that. Is journaling the way? Is it art expression? Is there some collaging that could be done? There just needs to be a way that people get a chance to reflect on where they're at after a moment like this, because that's really an important part of learning, as we know. So I would also encourage any of you who've been here today, if you have the time now to journal for 10 or 15 minutes after you've had this conversation, after we've had a chance to share all of these ideas with you, I really encourage you to take 10 or 15 minutes to journal, jot down some ideas, express how you feel to yourself, and think about how this film, how this documentary, how this discussion today has affected you, and maybe where you want to take it next. So finally, there will be just some business items. There will be a PDF form, which you can send in to us in order to request a special link to do your own screening. Canadian Women's Foundation will pay for that screening, and you will have access to this discussion guide, as well as all the other resources on the Subjects of Desire website to help you through that discussion. So that's the end. I'm sorry if I missed a question. Sharing the link to the film with a friend, I would say the best way to do it is perhaps to do a shared screening with that friend so that you can discuss it with them afterwards. So maybe that's the only answer I can give you for that question that I see in the Q&A right now. So thank you, everyone. It's been fantastic being able to share this with you. I have really appreciated your time. Thank you for everyone who stayed. It was an extra half hour, but I hope it was valuable to you. And I really appreciate your time today and look forward to hearing how the subjects of desire screening goes for all of you.